Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwaraha, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam Trailokyam Sacharacharam Tatpadam Darshitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva Tvameva Bandhu cha Sakha Tvameva Tvameva Vedya Dravinam Tvameva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matra Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstita Namastasyai 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 Namo Namaha. So we are still in the 18th chapter, discussing what is self-realization, what is our moksha, our freedom, and the cause of our bondage, etc. So what verse are we on?
I believe it's 64.
64. Who would like to chant tonight?
I can chant.
Punit, come closer so we can see and hear you if you would. Okay, what page is that? Do you know? You got it?
324.
Page 324.
64, 65.
Is that right? 64, 65?
Yes,
All right.
Evam chittim rite kinchit adiriktam na vidyate ata eva manopyantam ata eva manopyantyat sarvatha nasti vaichitehe. As any reflection does not appear without a mirror, and hence as the reflection cannot be different from the mirror, thus except consciousness, nothing different exists. For this very reason, even the mind is not at all different from consciousness.
Yes. So again, pedagogically, we go through this practice of subject-object discrimination, the discrimination between the self and the not self. That's only half the process. What this text is about is seeing the self in and through all the objects of the world. And just as the mirror is the substratum for all the images, in fact, it is the mirror itself appearing as the various images. So also all forms are nothing but Brahman. And here the Tattriya is stressing the mind itself is nothing but Brahman. What is the mind? The mind is the awareness of vrittis, the awareness of perceptions. The vrittis just appear like bubbles in the ocean. But the awareness, you do not have awareness. You do not own awareness. You are awareness. Next one.
Yatha swapne manastadjat jagratyapi mano nahi kalpitam karya sansiddhyai karanam kevalam manaha. As the mind does not exist separately in a dream, in which the knower, the instrument of knowledge, and the known objects are all of one nature, that is the mind. In that manner, mind does not exist separately in the waking state also. It is formed or intended for the accomplishment of work. Mind is a mere instrument.
Yes.
Note, there's a note.
Go ahead.
Both in a dream and in the waking state, it is the mind that takes the form of objects which have no existence apart from the mind.
So in a sense, we never really contact an objective world. We have sense perception, and the brain interprets all that stuff. There's no way to prove. Puneet's here in my living room. When he looks at the coffee table, whatever it is that his senses are reporting, he calls it coffee table. I look at the coffee table, I call it coffee table. There's no way to verify that his experience is the same as mine. We just kind of agree that whatever it is he's perceiving, he's calling it coffee table. So that's one way to look at it. And certainly from the standpoint, one's experience of the world is formed by our mind. I was talking this morning with my little brother. Now, he's 4 years younger than I, so he's 68. My baby brother is 68. I love that. He lives in Texas, in a suburb of Dallas. He's a conservative Republican. He rolls his eyes as his bleeding heart liberal brother in California. But it's fascinating to see the different ways we see the world. Who's right? There is no right. It's just what we see. And here again, Vedanta becomes very easy to understand if you clearly understand the dream state. It is my one mind, the chitta, the stuff of mind, that refracts into knower, knowing, and known in the dream state. The dreamer is me, the dream body is me, the dream senses is me, the dream objects I perceive is me. It's all just the refraction of mind. This is no different. And in fact, it's Ishvara who's doing the dreaming. And my puny little ego is just one of the objects in Ishvara's dream. It doesn't really belong to me, Jim. It belongs to me. So what? Why is this an important point? If we deeply understand that the world is like a dream. Take it easy. Wear your life like a loose garment. It's all going to work out. Why? Because the self in me and the self in all is never touched really by the world. Just like when you awaken from the nightmare, as horrible as it seemed to be, you, the waker, are untouched by any of the vicissitudes. In truth, right here, right now, you are untouched by any of the vicissitudes of the world. Going on, next one.
यथा स्वप्न कुठारः स्यात् करणं तरुच्छदने रामक्रिया सत्यरूपा सत्यं तत्करणं कथम्. Rama, as the axe seen in the dream can be the instrument for cutting a tree in the dream, how can that instrument be true when the act of cutting is unreal in nature? Note, the mind itself takes the form of the instrument, namely axe for cutting the tree, which act is obviously unreal. How then can the mind, the instrument, be real?
So, is the mind a real thing? No. We have layers of imagination here. Layers of imagination. So the unreal axe cuts down the unreal tree. To the dreamer, they seem real. The mind that created them is ephemeral. Now, my favorite image to understand this is the Alata Shanti, the firebrand in the 4th chapter of the Gaudapada in Mandukya. So you spin the firebrand and you see the circle, like the circle in the sparkler on Diwali or 4th of July. Now, it is consciousness itself in which the circle appears. Now that circle, which is the mind, all of a sudden becomes very powerful. It's as if you spun your sparkler and all of a sudden what showed up was a lens. And then it had this power to magnify and create and all this sort of stuff. It was very powerful, yet unreal. And just like when I stop moving the firebrand or the sparkler, the circle disappears. Stop the mind and you stop the world. Thin the mind and the world thins. We have this term tanu manasa, thinness of mind. So if you're supremely detached, your mind is introverted, is absorbed in the self, even while you're out in the world. Does it bother you? It doesn't shake you like it does for the person in ignorance. How do we practice that? Keep letting all the sensory data pass through. Do your best to stay shitala, cool. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Asata narashingena kada suvidaritah tasma nasti manorama cha satkaryasya karanam. Who has been torn asunder by the non-existent horn of a man, and when? Rama. Therefore, the mind which is the cause of an unreal act in a dream does not exist.
Yes. So, the cause and effect, my mind has caused the world. What the invitation here is to quit believing the mind. When the mind itself sees, perceives its own unreality, when the mind understands, I can't think a real thought, including the thought I just thought it. No thought is real. Then the mind just melts away. It's nowhere standing. There's no thing called a mind when I quit believing my thoughts. I have no thoughts or feelings of my own. That's another good meditation. None of these thoughts, none of these feelings belong to me. They're not real. I will not own them. It's just noise, and it'll pass. Swamiji used to say the way to heal the mind is to get out of the mind. Quit imbuing it with a false sense of reality. Any thoughts on this?
Jim, this is Lakshmi Raguna.
Hari Om, Lakshmi.
Hari Om, Jim. So nice to hear you. Is it possible to function in this world if we completely quit believing in our thoughts? How can we function at work? How can we function, interact with this world if we completely stop believing our thoughts?
The ordinary vyavahara, transactional thoughts are, by and large, not problematic. It's a relative reality.
Right.
But what starts to get problematic is, for example, when our ego gets attacked in some way. Someone says you're not doing a good job, or you're not a caring person, or you're stupid, or something like that. Of course, the opposite is where we get hooked. You're so wonderful, you're so caring, you're a great worker. And then ego goes, yes, I am. But what you want to do is you hear it, but you let it pass through. You have no attachment.
Agreed.
You see. And most importantly, renounce any personal sense of self. Now, what the psychologists tell us to do is when our ego is threatened, we reframe the story. Well, think about it. If the person said something cruel to you, what was going on with them today? They're probably upset. It's not really about you. That's an attempt to protect ego. Do you see that?
I agree. Yes, that is an attempt to protect the ego.
And that's okay at one level of our practice, but that's not what we're talking about now. No thought of self is real. Drop it.
But even that thought, if we are doing it out of compassion for the other person and saying, okay, this person is suffering, that's why they are hurting me, does it still become a thought to protect our ego?
And that is also unreal. Let it all go. Be empty. Let it pass through. So what I do frequently with students who are here in class, so I say, now look at me. Ugga bugga wappy booby bloober bobber. That's just nonsense, right?
Yes.
And then I say, you're a wonderful person. You're the smartest person I've ever known, and you're beautiful on top of it. Don't believe it. Ugga bugga floppy goopy dropper. You're a terrible woman, and you'll never amount to anything. Not only that, you're fat. Don't believe it. Ugga bugga floppy floopy flopper. It's nonsense. Let it pass through. Don't bite. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Thank you, Ajahn.
Good question. Good question. So, as it were, the woman of realization is a lucid dreamer. She walks around in this world of name and form, seemingly like everybody else, but she knows it's a dream. And therefore, she doesn't take it as real. She doesn't take it seriously. It's all going to be okay. Next verse.
Swapne drishikriya karya karanam karanam mana uchyate yatha tatha sarvadapi mano nasti kriyakaram. As the mind is declared as the instrument of the effect, which is the act of seeing in a dream, such as viewing being unreal, in that manner, the mind doing such acts, that is, as an instrument of perception, does not exist always, even in the waking state.
Yes.
There's a note.
Go ahead.
This verse reiterates the earlier conclusions. The non-existence of the mind as a perceiving instrument, even in the waking state, is mentioned.
Yes. So, not believing the mind. Whatever conclusions I come to, even the perceptions that I have, are all just Maya. Sarva Maya. Sarva Maya. All is Maya. All in the end is bliss. It's just a hologram going on. A light show. Nothing substantive or real. Going on.
Chidatma kevalam swachha swachan dhyanam ana adikam parikalpaya vyavahare drishya drishta dibhedatah kvachit kvachit kevalam tu nirvikalpa atmanastitah. The self, that is consciousness, merely through its pure freedom of will, affecting the mind and the rest, can act with differentiation as the seer, seen, and the rest. Sometimes it exists merely with the nature that is nirvikalpa or without thought constructs.
So what we're talking about here is when we talk about Nirvikalpa, you know, sometimes, so many of the scriptures say, strive hard for samadhi, your savikalpa samadhi then matures into Nirvikalpa samadhi. That's the state where the individuality explodes. And it's true and it's not true. Theoretically speaking, you don't need Nirvikalpa samadhi. And as we learned earlier in this chapter, what is samadhi? What is Nirvikalpa? It's simply the mind free from vimarsha, free from its deliberation, considerations. When there's just prakasha, the pure light of awareness. So don't get caught up in trying to chase Nirvikalpa samadhi. What is the fruit of Nirvikalpa samadhi? The fruit of Nirvikalpa samadhi is beyond the shadow of a doubt. I know who I am. So rather than being fixated on Nirvikalpa, do you know who you are? And always, if we define Nirvikalpa samadhi as that state where the distinction between knower, knowing, and known is merged or gone, think. Do you know you? Yes. Who knows it? I do. What is the means of knowledge? Me. What is the thing known, not as an object? Me. Aham nirvikalpaha. I am Nirvikalpa itself. And if this world is an illusion, I am always Nirvikalpa. It is my self-nature. So this is an understanding beyond the yogic notion of just a mind state. Now, what about the mind state of the mind disappearing? Swamiji used to talk about in the white heat of meditation, the mind explodes. This is my opinion. For some of us, we've had a very deep Nirvikalpa. And then it's very obvious from that point on, there is no personal sense of self. It's gone, just explodes. For others, it may just be a shift, click. Oh, I get it. So do not have romantic notions about what you think Nirvikalpa samadhi should be. You can then chase a romantic idea for years. Practice savikalpa samadhi, tuning up the mind. Practice introverting the mind, this atmaramana. Why? As Gita says, 2nd chapter, verse 55, when a man casts off all the desires of the mind, O Partha, and is satisfied in the self, by the self. That's the important point. Then she is said to be a woman of steady wisdom. So this Shankara says in his description of the fit guru, who is a full knower of the Supreme, who has retired into the Supreme. Then the world can't grab you by the nose and pull you out. And if you don't have that Atmarama, all the book learning, how many times you've read the scriptures, the world will continue to afflict you and trouble you. You do not have it, your mind will extrovert. Why? Because the ruthless rule of the mind will return to the experience that's given it the greatest joy. And if the only joy you really get is people, places, things, and situations, I may intellectually know, oh, the self is bliss. Yeah, but chocolate's really where it's at. Guess where your mind's going to go? And the problem with that is the world is temporary. The world is little. The world is chala, 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 always changing. But you are a permanent factor. In Gita, Krishna says, for the person in ignorance, the mind is his enemy. But for the person of wisdom, her mind is her friend. The mind is the cause both of bondage and of liberation. Self is ever free. And if by God's grace, Nirvikalpa Samadhi as a mind state of no mind sneaks up behind you and whacks you on the top of the head, fine. But don't worry about it. Do not make it another object of desire. Any thoughts on this? If the end result of your tapas is you know who you are, that's the point. All right, next verse.
Shrinu bhargava chittattvam paripurnam api swayam nakasha tulyam chaitanyat swaprakashamata sthitam akashtascha chidatma cha no vilakshanatam gatau. Bhargava, listen. The principle of consciousness, though by itself the whole, is not similar to the sky or space on account of its conscious nature. Therefore, it is self-luminous, not inert like the sky or space. Pure space and the self, that is consciousness, do not have any other difference.
Yes. So the self is like space, meaning it's everywhere, things are in it, it is not in things really, but it is unlike space. First of all, it doesn't take up any space. You actually are without dimension. And you are a conscious, sentient entity. You are not an it, you're a who. In Gita, we have a whole chapter called Purushottama Yoga. Uttama Purusha. The ultimate essence of personness. What is it that makes you a conscious living being? It's not your body. I'm sensitive. That's what makes me me. No, that's just your feeling. That's not the deep you. Not your thoughts. It's that you have Baba, you have being. Brahman is not just void like space. It is Purnam, it is full of being. And it is Kevala alone. There's not a bunch of conscious beings here. There's one. Listen very carefully. Your experience of I is the totality of Brahman. Not a piece of Brahman, not a little part of it. I'm just a little corner. Brahman's really big. No. How big are you? Brahman is indivisible. I am Atma, Brahma. This self is Brahman. Doesn't say this self is a piece of Brahman. Tattvamasi. You are that. Going on.
Purna Sukshmo Nirmalascha Ajonantopi Nirakritihi Sarvadharo Pyasangatma Sarvantara Baharbibhava Visheshastatra Chaitanyam Akashe Tanna Vidyate Vastu Taschai Tanyapurna Atmai Vakasha Uchyate. Both are whole, subtle, stainless, unborn, endless, formless, having an unattached nature, though the support of all and existing inside and outside everything. The characteristic difference there is consciousness, which does not exist in the sky or space. In reality, it is the self alone, full of consciousness, that is called the sky or space, since nothing exists really other than pure consciousness.
So what we perceive as space is full of being. You may think of space being inert, but it's not. So I love it. People will come up and ask me questions like, oh, Jim, do you think the earth is conscious? You've asked the wrong question. Of course the earth is conscious. Where is it that consciousness is not? It's everywhere. Everywhere. You know, if you put your finger 12 inches in front of your nose and drop your finger, it's really hard to focus your eye on space. But there God is. Everywhere. No inside, no outside. Sarvam kalpidam Brahma. This is verily Brahma. Next one.
Hyatmakashashar न ह्यात्माकाशयो भेदो लेशतोऽपि हि विद्यते य आकाश स आत्मैव यश्चात्माकाश एव सः. There is indeed not even a little difference between the self and the sky or space. That which is space is the self alone, and that which is the self is space alone.
So we make no distinction between Akasha and Chidakasha. In the end, there is no inert space. It's all Brahman. In the 11th chapter, 16th verse in Gita, Krishna says, the unreal, asat, has no non-being, abhavaha. There is no non-being, abhavaha, for the real, sat. The wise know the distinction of this. So we separate the world normally into things that exist and things that are unreal. The chair exists, the lamp exists, those are real. The horns of a hare, that's not real, that's just imagination. The child of a barren woman, that's just imagination, it's not real. Real, unreal. We also separate the world into things and beings. The chair is a thing, the table is a thing, Puneet is a being. If you have a pet dog, it's a being. What Krishna is saying here there is no non-existence to being. Being is the only thing that truly is. If it has no being, it does not exist. That's the only thing that truly exists, is Bhava, being. So the space in which the entire cosmos exists is Purnam. The chant we do at the end of class, Purnamada Purnamidam, Purnam Adaha, that, meaning Brahman, is Purnam, full of being. Purnam Idam, all this. The phenomenal world is full of being. There's no difference. Purnat Purnamudachyate. From the fullness of that, the fullness of this has proceeded or issued forth. No difference. Purnasya Purnamadaya. And when the forms disappear, when the fullness of this is removed from the fullness of that. Purnam eva avashishyate. Being, existence, fullness. Next verse.
Agnya pashyan yatma rupam akasham iti vaibhramat saura lokam yatho lukas tamo matram prapashyati. Ignorant ones see the natural state of the self as space due to the delusion, as the owl sees the light of the sun as mere darkness.
So the foolish person, the ignorant person, looks out at the world of name and form which occurs in space and does not know that the space, the context of all name and form is consciousness. Thinks it's just inert space. Next one.
Akasham eva vijñatsu pashyantatma chidatmakam parachitti pareshani swacha swatantra vaibhavat avabhasa yedatmanam parichannam agnikadha yatha rama swamatmanam swapne bahuvidham prithak Manushya vibhedena bhasa yasve vam eva hi. But wise ones see the very sky or space as a self of the nature of consciousness. Transcendental consciousness, the supreme ruler or goddess, on account of the power of its pure freedom of will, can manifest itself variously divided in the same way as you manifest your own self manifoldly and separately with the distinction of men and the like in a dream.
Yes. So just like, well, you've heard me say this before, you are the god of your dream. In the dream, your one unified mind appears as the dream body, which becomes a locus of perception, and a dream ego. So I think I am that body. And there's a world of name and form outside and a world of thoughts and feelings inside. But the space in which the dream takes place is your mind. The world outside is your mind. The world in thoughts and feelings is your mind. The dream body, the dream ego, the sense of me, the perceiver, is all my mind. All this is mind with a capital M. And the goddess, by her swatantra, that's the term the shloka used, by her own self-power, manifests all this in the same way. Now, the creatures in her dream are deluded. She is never deluded. What does that practically mean? You may say, oh, I'm not realized. I'm a fool. I'm caught in ignorance. Okay. But set that aside and answer me this question. Are you you? I'm me. What's your day like? Oh, it's miserable, Jim. Did you know the misery today? Oh, did I know the misery today? So you still thunder, I am. I shine as awareness. You do not lack. The perfect knowledge of self-evidence. What you have is a stupid mind. No one comes to say, oh, I lost myself. For 3 hours today, I ran around, but I wasn't. Nobody says that. The very fact that you knew you ran around for 3 hours proves you were there. Next verse.
अनेकधा वभासोऽपि परिच्छिन्न अदृश्येव हि स्वयं स्वदृष्टया पूर्णात् मपूर्ति स्वयं स्वदृष्टया पूर्णात् मरूपिण्यन एव पराचितिः. Even the appearance variously is indeed through divided perception in your case. The Supreme Consciousness by itself and through its own perception has only the nature of the whole self.
Read that again. It didn't quite make sense to me.
Even the appearance variously is indeed through divided perception in your case. The Supreme Consciousness by itself and through its own perception has only the nature of the whole self.
So just like in the dream, I have the experience of divided perception, but it's my one undivided mind appearing as it. So also all this, which appears with multiplicity, is Brahman alone, undivided. One of the images that I like the most is the phenomenal world is like a tapestry. So for example, if you were here in my living room, you'd see the carpet on the floor. And can you see the snakes on the border, Puneet?
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Now, are there snakes glued down there, or is the weaving such that it's the threads themselves appearing as the snakes? If you start pulling threads, the snakes are gone. And whatever's next to the thread is still the one, what is it, woof and warp of the rug. So also this world. You can't say there's a place where there's lumps of consciousness. It's all just one screen. And the movie just keeps moving by. There's no real distinction between the Puneet body and the table. It's all just Brahman. Like a tapestry. Next one.
ऐन्द्रजालिक एकोऽपि स्वमात्मम् अनकेकधा भासयन्त्रदृष्टानां स्वदृष्टा भासते स्वयं एक एव निर्विकार एवं सा परमाचितिः शुद्धैकरूपभासापि परिच्छिन्ना ह्यनेकधा परिच्छिन्न स्वरूपाणां भासयेद् माययावृता. A magician, though alone, making himself appear variously to the viewers there, appears by himself and through his own perception as one and the same only and without change. Thus that Supreme Consciousness, though pure and shining with the same nature, divided variously, being covered by her own power of Maya, can manifest a multitude of objects having a nature which is divided or limited.
So a Mayavi or Indravi, what's the word he used here?
Mayavi.
I thought it was Mayavi, yeah. A magician. So in old-timey days in India, you would see some sort of a Mayavi on a street corner, and he would take out his little reed pipe and he'd take off the lid of the basket and a rope would extend into the sky like a snake coming out of the basket. And then he would climb up to the top of the rope and then he'd go poof, and he'd be back there on the ground again. Then he'd ask for rupees, for money. Really what was happening is he was hypnotizing the crowd. He never left the ground. The rope never went up. He was never up in the sky. It just appeared that way because of hypnotism. So also the goddess by her Maya Shakti has us all hypnotized, where we believe that the names and forms are real and separate, and are born and they suffer and they die. But really, consciousness is sthita, still, never really moves. Next one.
Actually, the word for magician he used was Indra Jalika. So Indrajal. Next one.
Okay, thank you.
Maya Varanamam Yetat Parichinna Drasho Bhavet Yathaindra Jaliko Maya Vrittan Shan Yadrisho Bhavet. Even this covering by Maya of consciousness would be for those having a divided or limited perception, just as a magician would be covered by Maya only in the perception of others.
Read it again, please.
Even this covering by Maya or of consciousness would be for those having a divided or limited perception, just as a magician would be covered by Maya only in the perception of others.
Yes. So this idea, Aindrajala.
Yeah.
So Indra meaning the mind or godlike powers, Jala meaning a web.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, spinning a web, magician's web, that's what it is. But the idea here is, if you're behind the magician on the side of the road, the people in front, they get hypnotized. But you say, he's just sitting there blowing on his pipe, doesn't cover. So also, it is possible for some rare souls to cross beyond Maya and not be deluded by the web of the world. Also, just as the magician covers himself with the Maya, the other people aren't covered by it. The idea here is the point. The point is you and I can pierce the veil, see through the illusion. Even though it may still be perceived by our senses, we're not fooled by it. You go to the magic show, you see the magician have this box on the stage. He has someone come up from the audience, lie down in the box, closes it all up, takes a saw and saws them in half. And everybody goes, ah! It's a trick. It's an illusion. So you find out how they did it. But then the next time you're at the show, you're in the audience, and there they are sawing the woman in half. And you go, dang, it sure looks like he's sawing her in half. I know what's going on, but it looks so real. No different than when you go to a action movie. There's a big explosion on the screen and everybody in the theater jumps. You know it's a movie. Still you jump. Illusion. Next one.
Maya parachitotyantam swatantra mati durgatam lokepi yogino nyecha mantrika indrajalikaha achaditam swaswatantram prapya kinchit suyuktitah durghatam ghatayantyeva tato nai tadichitritam. Maya is the complete freedom of will of the Supreme Consciousness and is extremely difficult, making impossible things to happen. Even in the world, yogins and others who are magicians conversant with incantations, attaining a little of their own freedom of will, which is covered by Maya, verily cause to happen what is difficult or impossible through proper means. Therefore, this manifestation of the world by Supreme Consciousness through its unlimited freedom of will is not surprising.
Yes. So, yogis through incantations, through mantra, through gems, or in the Western world now, we have people who are into manifesting, affirmations and visualizations and things like that. These yogis, these healers can have a limited capacity to do some dream shaping. But the Lord, infinite capacity to dream. No limit to it. And here the scripture says, the Lord or the goddess can make the impossible seem possible. What does the text mean by that? It's impossible for consciousness, which is one without a second, and ever the eternal subject, which is kutusta, still, unmoving, achalam, no motion at all, to have within it an entire cosmos appear, to move. So my favorite definition of Maya, Maya is the word that describes how the impossible seems possible. Yet it happens. And that consciousness is never moved or changed by the appearance of the cosmos. Next one. How many more verses do we have in this chapter?
A lot more.
Okay.
Evam parachitte swacha swatantra yat swatmano vapuhu anekadha parichinnam bhasitam bhrigunandanam. Bhargava, thus on account of the pure freedom of will of Supreme Consciousness, its own natural state is manifested as variously divided.
So, by its swatantra, its own power of will, consciousness, listen carefully, Maya is co-eternal with Brahman. It is the nature of consciousness to appear as a world of name and form. Why? I don't know. So when we say for Lord Shiva, he opens his eyes and the world turns to ashes, every one of us needs to open that jnana chakshu and reduce the world to ashes. What does that mean? When I'm seeing with just two eyes, good and bad, self and not self, the dvandvas, the pairs of opposites. I'm over here and the world's over there. But when the jnana chakshu opens, I see it looks like two Dvaita. It's not. It's Advaita. It's all consciousness. And then I've burnt down the world. I don't see a world. I see the light show, Maya, appearing in the great space of consciousness. That's the deeper meaning. To those of you who are raised in the Christian tradition, one of the sayings of Jesus that just is plopped into the Gospels with no preparation or no explanation following, he says, if thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be filled with light. What did he mean by that? He's saying the same thing. When the eye of wisdom opens, when you have a single eye, but not only this body, but everything else is nothing but the light of pure awareness, the prakasha we talked about. Purest Vedanta, right there in the Gospels. Going on.
Parichedo vimanasya tvekadeshe suvishramah sapya purna vikhyatiryam vidya parigiyate. Division or limitation is the resting of self-consciousness or awareness of division or limitation is the resting of self-consciousness or awareness as I in one place. That alone is knowledge of incompleteness, which is declared as avidya or ignorance.
Yes. So there is nothing more to my ignorance than the deeply rooted conviction that I'm bound, that I'm my body, that I'm a person. It's not true, never was true. It's just a deeply rooted conviction. From time immemorial. I've since ignorance is beginningless. But it does have an end. It does does have an end. Okay, we'll end here. What verse are we on for next week?
88.
Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Om. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
Ganesh, did we have some bombers try to get in? I thought I heard